Well, thanks very much for coming along this evening. Can I just ask, is there anyone who needs any further introduction as to who I am? Does everybody know that? Okay, you're great, fantastic. Okay, well, I think, how long ago is it since I was last here? 18 months?
It was a year.
Is it a year? Oh, time flies and you're having fun. This is the, what was I speaking on then? I was speaking on the economy, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
On the economic meltdown. Okay, it seems such a long time ago because tonight is the 91st time I've presented this subject this year. No two presentations are the same. I don't follow a script, I just sort of follow what comes into my head. And I also try and make them relevant to the area where I'm speaking. And what you're going to see after tonight is that it's unbelievable that there's only 32 or 3 people here when your area is about to be destroyed. Your properties are about to tank in value. And basically, your whole environment as you know it will be destroyed. Maybe not in your lifetime, because what is about to be unleashed in this area is a time bomb. And it might hit in a matter of weeks, months, years. The only guarantee is that it will hit. It will absolutely hit. Unless, of course, the people stop it. And the good news is that it's great to see some of the Balkan Massive here tonight. More of that later, because these are part of a group of people who have bought us more time. Because when I started talking about this subject earlier this year, I actually said we have 6 months to get this thing shut down. Well, we have 6 months to push it back another 6 months, and now we've got another 6 months. And if we can just keep pushing it back, then for the time being, that'll work for me. Because the longer we can keep pushing it back, the more opportunity we have to get people to realise the magnitude of what is being proposed. And the British government and the industry is very good at presenting the positives, and it's like all things, you can make something sound truly amazing if you conveniently ignore all of the negatives. So, let me just ask the question first of all, is there anybody here this evening who is actually sitting on the fence as to whether exploring and developing unconventional hydrocarbons is a good idea or not? Okay, 3 of you, that's great. That's great, at least I'm not preaching entirely to the choir. Well, let me make the observation. I certainly don't expect you guys to take anything I say at face value. In fact, I'd rather you didn't. That's what the mainstream and the government and the industry want you to do. They want you to simply go, oh right, oh yeah. Take what they say at face value and not check the facts. We do it from completely the other side of the coin. We say, look, we don't want you to take anything we say at face value. In fact, if you have your iPhones with you, I'm very happy for you to check along with me as I speak. Because the evidence which I'm going to show you, the government and the industry says doesn't exist, is actually blatantly obvious. It's what we call cognitive dissonance, or institutional denial. In other words, you're so vested, you're so heavily vested in that industry, that even though the evidence is staring in the face, it's the proverbial elephant in the living room, you don't want to see it. So, this is the first time in 12 years that I've really spoken on something that is current, i.e. right now. Because since I came out of the corporate world in my last salary check from the corporate world was October of 2000. And in that ensuing period, I've focused on addressing the longer-term agenda. There's always one, isn't there? Well, that's your reminder. That's your reminder. Mind you, having said that, the one is often mine, so don't worry about it. So, I've spent the best part of the last 12 years trying to share with people, those who have an interest in looking at the longer term game plan, as to what's coming down the pipe. And often I'm talking 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years or more sometimes. Because, let me assure you, nothing is by chance. Nothing. One of the lectures I gave earlier this year was looking at everything that's unfolding in terms of the control grid, and the smart meters, smart this, smart that, and we can trace that back to the 1930s. The only thing they didn't have in the 1930s was the technology to do it. Now they've got the technology to do what they actually wanted to do. So the script is out there. And this, what I'm talking about tonight, is actually part of a longer term agenda, which you could probably work out for yourself as we go through. But we don't need to really worry too much about the long term agenda here, because this is so poignant that if we don't shut it down, we may not need to worry about a long term agenda, because it may be a moot point. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak till about 9 o'clock. It's going to be very fast paced. I'm going to cover a lot of ground. And then we'll take a short break, get a cup of tea, and then I'll speak for about another 3/4 an hour or so, and then we'll have some time for questions. Okay? Right. Well, let's have a look at why it is that this is such a mega issue for the country. And that is because 64% of this country, ironically, and you'll see the irony or the synchronicity, whichever way you want to look at it, of this, the physical vehicle, the human body, is 64% water. And that's exactly the same percentage of the UK that is sitting above shale gas or coal bed methane deposits, according to the British Geographical and British Geological Societies. So everything you see in green is potentially viable shale or coal bed methane deposits. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that the two authors of these reports live about here. Because if you look at the map, there's no question whatsoever that there's some pretty sound shale deposits right under there. Now, let me make it very clear. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that there are enormous deposits of shale gas. I'm not so sure about coal bed methane. I think that's a distraction, actually. But there are enormous deposits of shale gas in this country. But as you're going to see, we haven't had the technology to extract them forever. And in my opinion, we still don't have the technology to extract them. So they need to be left exactly where they are for reasons that will become obvious. So, because of the size of the country and because of the population density, because nowhere in the world where this process has been unleashed beneath the country, nowhere in the world is the population density anything like it is here. For example, the population density of Colorado is 1/20th of that of the UK. And the population density of southern Queensland, which we're going to take a look at later, is exactly 1/100th of the UK. So, we're talking an enormous difference. And the report that was dismissed in the media last week, where in the US it had been used models, Cornell University used a model to establish that basically an extra 10 people would get cancer in the mile radius of a shale gas well. Well, it was being dismissed here as dodgy research, primarily because if you extrapolate those numbers, that was an extra 10 people in Colorado. Because we have a population density 20 times that, you're talking an extra 200 people. And of course, they just say, oh no, that's dodgy research. The other areas that aren't supposedly over shale gas deposits are also going to be impacted, because what's going to happen is the people who have access to the cash or to the borrowing, once they realise that the gas industry is moving into their area, they're going to move. And it's going to put enormous pressure on the properties in Suffolk, Eastern Essex. Those are going to be the counties that feel it first because of the commuter area. Southern Norfolk and Cambridgeshire, Devon and Cornwall, well, that's already under enormous pressure, with 1 in every 8 homes there being a second home already. So the area that's going to actually be probably most attractive is West Wales here. So if I was a gambling man and I thought that this might actually kick off, I'd say an area to start looking at would be Aberystwyth. Because that's an economy that's been in the doldrums for a long time. All the areas in brown, which is about 20%, are already licensed and have been licensed for some time. But they're all licensed to companies that in most cases people have never heard of. And that's for a very, very good reason, which I'll explain in a while. Now in this area, of course, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Witch Farm. And there's been a lot of attempts by the government and the PR consultants for the shale gas industry to try to claim that mining for unconventional gas is no different than what's been going on at Witch Farm for 20 odd years now. That is totally untrue. Totally untrue. In fact, there was a guy who came to my presentation I gave in Bath a few weeks ago, and he was clearly there to disrupt. And eventually he chose the wrong subject because he tried to claim that Witch Farm was evidence that this process could be conducted safely, and I just tore him apart, and at that point the audience threw him out. I didn't need to do anything. Then we discovered he was giving a speech in Bath the following Monday. So guess what? We went along to that. And I can tell you, he was making it up as he went along. I mean, this is what the apologists for this industry have to do. They make it up as they go along. And of course, for those of you who don't know, what these apologists don't like, and that's the reason they choose to ignore me, is because I spent 20 years working with Schlumberger in the oilfield services industry. So although I had nothing at all to do with Witch Farm, the horizontal wells in Witch Farm were drilled by Schlumberger. At the time, they were the longest horizontal reach wells on the planet, stretching 15 kilometres out. And the reason that was so necessary was because a deal was reached between BP and the Bournemouth and Poole local councils and the Dorset County Council to not put rigs offshore because the residents of Sandbanks wouldn't like it. Well, and it might affect tourism. So the whole idea was to cut a deal where the local authorities contributed towards BP's costs of siting the rigs here. Okay? So Witch Farm is classified as an onshore reservoir, but the reality is about 70% of the reservoir is actually offshore. It's under Poole Harbour and it goes out into the well, you can see it here. It goes out into the Solent. Now this was BP, but last year BP sold its interests in Witch Farm to the company that holds the licence for unconventional gas exploration and production in this area. It's a company called Perenco. So BP sold its interests in Witch Farm to Perenco. So Perenco now is the sort of primary oil industry presence in the area. And they sold it to Perenco for $610 million. That's about 420 odd million pounds. And the production of Witch Farm is a pretty steady 20,000 barrels a day. So that's an approximate revenue from the oil of Witch Farm of about £2 million, give or take, per day. But the reality is that this is conventional technology. It really has no bearing whatsoever on the discussion of shale gas or coal bed methane. So when you have the media, this is from the Daily Telegraph, saying the town where fracking is already happening, it's totally misleading. It's conflation. So, I mean, I'll give the journalists the benefit of the doubt because I don't expect them to sort of have the detailed knowledge of the industry. But the industry, whoever's feeding them this within the industry will know that this is actual conflation. In other words, what it's doing is it's using one example when in reality that example is totally inappropriate. Because although, as I'll share with you later, we certainly don't need to be consuming hydrocarbons in anything like the volumes that they're being consumed on the planet, the reality is that the conventional oil and gas industry is mature. And it is true that the conventional oil and gas industry is much more heavily regulated in this country than it is in the US. But it is certainly not true to suggest that any regulation of unconventional oil and gas exploration or drilling is better, because basically there isn't any, period. And that's what the industry is trying to ensure remains the case. That there is basically zero regulation, and they say, oh no, we'll just monitor it ourselves. Right. So let's have a look at the the threats around the UK, what you see here, I mean, these are the areas that are the primary targets. And this is the north-west, the desolate north-west, of course. That was Lord Howe. Well, Lord Howler it should be, shouldn't it? Because during the Balkan campaign, he made the observation in the Lords that maybe we shouldn't, worry too much about the south, because obviously there's a lot of opposition there. So let's just go frack in the desolate northeast. Well, the desolate northeast, actually, it's around here. It's East Yorkshire and South Yorkshire and down into Nottinghamshire that are the primary targets. And there's a little bit up in Teesside, but anyway, nonetheless, the people in the not so desolate northeast got a little bit upset about his statement. And then the following day, he dug the hole even deeper when he said, "Oh no, I didn't mean the desolate northeast, I meant the desolate northwest." Well, that just about pissed off all the people over here. And then his son-in-law, George Osborne, stepped into the breach the following day by basically just saying, we just need to frack the whole country, basically, especially in the south. I think I may have a... There he is. I would love fracking to get going in the UK. So these guys make it very, very clear, what their game plan is. But as you can see, everything that's shaded here is already licensed. But we have had some tremendous victories, which have undoubtedly come about as a result of Balkan. 5 local councils that were being targeted in East Kent for exploratory drilling. All those parish councils have stated that they will oppose any planning application to come into their jurisdiction. In reality, it's not a hollow victory, but it's not a complete victory, because the parish council is only advisory in this situation, because it's the county council that ultimately has the final say, and the British government is doing everything it can to remove the county councils from the decision-making process as well. It wants to take all decisions regarding unconventional gas at central government level, which is why David Cameron is doing everything he possibly can right now to find ways to override all existing barriers, such as environmental impact assessments and waste licences, etc., etc. So South Wales is a big target. We have another victory here, following on from Kent, where Wisborough Green Parish Council 2 or 3 days ago also voted that they would not support any application to drill in the area. Brent, this is a bit hollow, but Brent Council in London have stated that they are going to keep their authority frack free. Now, when you look at the map of Brent, apart from a few parks, there's basically nowhere to drill anyway. But hey, that aside, the fact is that if we can pick these councils off one by one, and so that basically you can show that across the whole country, increasingly there are communities that are going to reject this abomination. So down here, although it's not necessarily an immediate threat, i.e. next week, next month, potentially for 2014, absolutely. And the companies are going to keep trying to make sure that your eyes are not on the ball. So let's look at a bit more detail here. So this is the area that is licensed currently. Now, about 8 weeks ago or so, Egdon Resources put out a press release stating that it was extremely unlikely that they would exploit the shale resources in this area. But when the press release went into the local papers, people interpreted it as it was everything here, as that it was all of these licenses, but it wasn't. It was just Egdon Resources. Now, actually, the irony is Egdon are probably one of the more professional companies, more experienced companies. They do tend to operate beneath the radar. You have to watch them very, very carefully, because they successfully managed to drill 2 exploratory wells in Humberside without anybody realising what was going on. So it was too late. Now, they're exploratory wells, and fortunately, of course, the people in the area now know that those exploratory wells have been drilled, and they're watching, obviously, like the proverbial hawks. But I will give Egdon Resources their due. Their environmental impact assessment ran to 357 pages, and it was phenomenally detailed. And you know what? It was so detailed that the local authority should have identified what was missing. Because what Egdon Resources did was they focused on the environmental impact on the surface, conveniently ignoring what the game plan was underground. So, you know, it's a classic technique of obfuscation. So Egdon Resources, though, like I said, they're very professional. And when it looked like they were going to get the go-ahead in June, then their stock price shot up. I mean, everything's relative because this is pennies, but everything's relative. The stock price shot up. But then, as it became apparent that they weren't quite going to have the free run that they thought, the stock price went down. And this is good news, because one of the things that we have to do is we have to try and get the message across to investors that this ain't a smart industry to invest in. It's very, very high risk. In fact, it's so high risk, the likelihood is you're going to lose your money. So, go in there. In the middle here we have Perenco. Like I said, that's the company that has acquired Wych Farm from BP. Now, the downside of that is it means that you have to watch them like a hawk, because they will already have infrastructure in this area. There will already be truck movements, obviously, related to Perenco's interest in Wych Farm. So it's not so easy necessarily to spot a sudden change in activity. So it's absolutely going to be essential that the local groups like Fracktured Dorset have people in their groups that are monitoring the planning applications with the proverbial fine-tooth comb. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Manchester in a while, because it looks like going through the planning application in Manchester is what has pushed iGas back. Because once we know what we're looking for, and once you've got people in the local area who literally can sit down and focus on the planning applications, then you've got a chance in actually bringing it to a halt. So Perenco, I think, is going to be one to watch in a big way. And then we have Norwest. Now, this is not a particularly large company, and in my opinion, their game plan is simply to establish the planning permissions, and then they will sell. Once they've established planning permissions to put pads in place, then obviously the value of that license will become much greater. It's like having planning permission to extend your home. Obviously the value then goes up because that planning permission is already in place. But this is the kicker. The big difference between unconventional and conventional is that Wych Farm is effectively fed primarily from this one site. Because when you are drilling through conventional geology, you can drill for enormous distances, because you're drilling through soft rock, or you can choose the geology that you're drilling through and just keep on going out there. With unconventional geology, you can't do that. Unconventional geology is also called tight geology, and I'll show you an animation in a little while so that you have a sort of visual picture of what's going on here. But tight geology, it's a great description because it's very, very compact, very compressed. It's very difficult to drill through. If you can imagine, like trying to drill through a steel girder with a wood drill and a Black & Decker. I mean, in theory, it's possible. It's going to take you a long time, and you have to be really, really gentle with the drill bits. But you're still going to go through a lot of drill bits. So, because it's a very expensive process to keep tripping the pipes, take the drill pipe out to change the drill head, which, by the way, in Borkum, the drill bit broke something like about 11 times. Yeah. And you know what is really interesting? The Gurkhas who were on duty, the Gurkhas made this observation, that coincidentally, the drill bit seemed to break every time the Druids held one of their ceremonies outside the gate. And of course, the local police went, that's way beyond their comprehension. But the Gurkhas said, no, there is a relationship here. There is a relationship. Every time those guys hold a ceremony, the drill bit breaks.
Can I just say, Ian, it wasn't just the Druids that were there. Well, I know for a fact all around the planet, as well as all in this country, people were doing mass meditations. Send out that positive vibe, and it works. And it did.
Yeah.
We were there and we witnessed it, and it did. Interruption over, I'm not expert.
I certainly would be the last one to dispute that. But the focus, obviously, the visible evidence was the Druids.
Yeah.
So anyway, eventually, the Druids had a word with Quadrilla. Quadrilla had a word with the police, and the police shut down the Druids from holding their ceremony at the gates. So of course I had a word with them when I was in Piccadilly on Monday, making sure they're coming to Manchester.
Yeah.
Anyway. But okay, so this is Witch Farm. I mean, this is Witch Farm 20 years on. Nearest down there, I think it was 96 actually started running there. But this is Witch Farm nearly 2 decades on. And like I said, it was sited so that it was out of sight for the residents and tourists alike. Because unconventional geology requires so many pads over such a small area. This is what Quadrilla's own statement says that the Filed Peninsula will look like. And in fact, they've actually defended this in the Lords on Monday, and they said, yeah, but when you put all the pads together, it's only going to be the equivalent of about 2 square kilometres. Well, it's not just 2 square kilometres. Each pad, by the way, is slightly less than 1 hectare. And the reason that they're slightly less than 1 hectare is because current government rules demand a comprehensive environmental impact analysis if the site is more than 1 hectare. If it's less than 1 hectare, they just have to do a cursory analysis, a couple of pages. So they keep them deliberately under 1 hectare to avoid having to go into any great depth. But it's not just that, it's the infrastructure that goes with it, because each one of these pads will require something in the region of about 4,000 truck movements before the pad becomes operational. So you've got a phenomenal pressure on the infrastructure. I mean, up in the Filed Peninsula, basically it's the M6 and the M55, and then this is all rural area. In fact, one of the guys who was with us at Downing Street on Monday is Andy Pemberton, who's a dairy farmer in the area. And the farmers are now starting to realise that if this kicks off, then the bottom line is the likelihood is their businesses are going to be destroyed. So imagine that, though, literally right across the country. And let me show you what it looks like on a physical landscape. And this is typical. There are areas that are a lot worse than this in West Texas. So I'm going to show you a typical one because this is southern Queensland, where the population density is 1/100th of that of the UK. So here, I mean, this isn't the outback. This is a few miles. This is about 120 miles west of Brisbane. This is around the Dalby area. But you can see, so there's not much there. It's agricultural, but they can put the infrastructure, they can put the road links wherever they want. That's to bring in all the hardware, and then the fluids, and as you're going to see, a massive amount of the truck movements are fluids related. In Australia, they've got the other problem of disposing of fluids, which they're just basically pouring it out on the dirt roads here, but more of that later. But imagine that kind of pressure on our infrastructure. And of course the knock-on effects in terms of road traffic accidents, pressures on local hospitals. These are the butterfly effects that people actually don't think about. It's like building the M25. When they built the M25 and it was 3 lanes, the planners actually forgot to take into account the opportunity impact, i.e. the fact that it's there means that more people will actually do those journeys, and so now it's 5 lanes in parts and still it still gets congested. But that's what it looks like in reality, and that's what Quadrilla actually openly admit the Filed Peninsula will look like once they start to go into full development.
Are those little squares to scale?
No, of course not. If they were to scale, they'd be a dot. But I mean, what I'm trying to illustrate here, is the fact that, and by the way, this is conservative. This is conservative because this is the first phase because ultimately what would happen is then they would drill pads in between the other ones. Because it's tight, because it's compact geology, the horizontal section, which you're going to see in a second, can literally only go a few hundred yards. So each vertical well, each of these pads, has one, sometimes two vertical wells, but if they had two, then they would definitely be over 1 hectare and therefore require a detailed environmental impact analysis. But each of those vertical wells will have at least 6 and more likely 8 horizontal sections. So the horizontal sections, and I'm going to show you an animation in a minute to put this in perspective for you, but the horizontal sections will go out at all points around the compass. And then in the north of England, where the Bowland Shale is 5,000 feet thick, when they've milked the top layer, they'll just plug the horizontal sections and then drill a bit deeper and then drill another 8 horizontal sections, milk that layer, plug it and drill deeper. So that's why when Quadrilla talk about the pads in the northwest having a life of 40 to 140 years, I mean, it's a bit like that, but you know, there is some plausibility in those statements. By that time, though, there won't be any life in this country, so
Won't be any life on the
yeah,
planet.
won't be life on the planet, exactly. So let's have a look at who's driving this, because you know, it's important to know a little bit about the background here. I was actually giving a series of talks in Ireland in May of 2011 called The Pillage of Ireland's Resources, where I was explaining to the people of Ireland how their country had been deliberately taken into an economic abyss with the deliberate intention to pillage Ireland's enormous natural resources. I'm not going to go into all the details tonight, but Ireland should be one of the wealthiest nations in Western Europe because of its enormous natural resources. But thanks to corrupt governments and corrupt politicians, corrupt bankers, it's effectively just been gifted away. Ireland is today a colony of the EU. You know, up until 1922 it was a colony of the UK. Some might argue it was still a colony of the UK, but now it is a colony of the EU and the bankers. Anyway, I was in the heart of Ireland, in a place called Manor Hamilton in Leitrim, on the evening of the day that it had been announced in the UK that there had been a second earthquake in the Blackpool area. And this second earthquake, this is May the 28th, I was in Manor Hamilton, it was May the 27th that the earthquake was announced. And this is the first earthquake, where am I? It was centred about here. The first earthquake was 2.3 on the Richter scale, second one was 1.5. Now these are not tsunami-inducing events, but they damage properties. I mean, I've been in properties where I've seen, you see the ceilings have lifted away from the walls, door frames have come away from the walls, bathroom tiles have cracked, so there was sufficient movement to cause this minor damage. All of which, of course, is denied by the British government and the industry. Although Quadrilla have acknowledged that they were, and I quote, most probably responsible for the seismic events. Now, most probably is corporate and government speak for, yeah, we did it, but that's as much as you're going to get. But nonetheless, that's pretty much an acknowledgement that they were responsible. What we now know is that Quadrilla were actually responsible for something in the region of 48 to 90 seismic events. Most of them so minor that you certainly wouldn't notice them, but the fact that they're monitored, the fact that Quadrilla knew about them, didn't report them, and certainly didn't stop any of their activity there, and then when it was realised at government level that they kept on going despite the fact that they knew that they were triggering these events, and they were censured by the then, I've lost track of energy ministers, we're on 3 in 18 months now. But they were censored by the energy minister, who was then fired. And the reason he was fired is because we have somebody at the absolute heart of British government who's driving this agenda. But I must confess, when that a report came out, I actually said to the audience in Manor Hamilton, I said, thank God for that. Because hopefully now, that's enough to stop this madness. And I said, you need to watch very closely what's going on in the UK because right in the heart of Ireland, where I was, in Leitrim, is an enormous shale deposit called the Loch Allen Basin. And I said, you guys better hope that this abomination doesn't come here. And I said, and I think the Irish government will watch what the British government's doing. The Irish government have actually put a sort of semi-moratorium on fracking for the moment. Primarily, they're watching what goes on in the UK. So, the moratorium in the UK was put in place in early June of 2011. And I must confess, I took my eye a little bit off the ball. I thought, that's great, fantastic, hopefully that's the end of that. And I concentrated on trying to explain what was going on with the economy. But then, I realised we had a problem when this guy held a press conference in November of last year and told the media, and I quote, that he was going to do whatever it takes to get Britain at the heart of the shale gas revolution. And when I heard that, I thought, oh shit, we got a problem. And I knew that he was being trotted out by Cameron to see what the reaction of the media and the public would be. Unfortunately, there wasn't a reaction. And when there wasn't a reaction, that meant that Cameron was sufficiently cocky to be able to announce that he was lifting the moratorium and Britain needed to get to the heart of the shale gas revolution as quickly as possible. That was the first week of December of last year. That was the point at which I immediately shut down all the plans I had for 2013 and started to put the wheels in motion for the tour, the Fractured Future Tour, which kicked off in February and is still going on to this day and will still go on until we actually get this thing nailed. But this guy is the former Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of BP. Now, I won't bore you with all the details again tonight, but he had a remarkable mentor when he was at BP, because when he was appointed Chief Executive Officer, the Chairman of the company was a guy called Peter Sutherland, who is a nasty piece of work. He's an Irishman by accident of birth, but he's an arch globalist. He is actually the architect of the destruction of the Irish economy. His task was to demonstrate that he had no nationalism within him and that he will take down the Irish economy and literally hand Ireland over to the global corporatists. Peter Sutherland was actually interviewed by the BBC on the 21st of June last year, and in that interview he stated to the BBC that his vision was a one world government and the destruction of national homogeneity, and the primary tool by which they would achieve it was immigration.
Yeah.
It's open there.
I go with that.
These guys, part of their belief system is that they have to tell us what they're planning to do. Because, well, they hope you won't believe it. Because if we don't react, they take our apathy, and they have a phrase for it, it's called social license. And what social license means is it means that the public are so apathetic, they don't give a shit, and they'll just let it happen. They'll just let it go. And this is the guy literally spelling out, you'll find the article, if you just search Sutherland, homogeneity, BBC, you'll find the article up there, and it was reported in the papers the following day. So it's out there. Well, he was this guy's mentor. These people have lost, if they had any in the first place, all vestiges of humanity. The way they function, the way they think, is inhuman. This guy's mantra was, and still is, profit above all else. And I emphasise the all. When he was appointed Chief Executive in early '95, he was sort of given his mission statement by Peter Sutherland, and his goal was to take BP from a second division national oil company to a global player, which he's done. And so when he left the role in 2007, BP was, and still is today, the 6th largest oil company on the planet. But how he achieved that is very, telling. It's very important to everything I'm sharing with you tonight. What he was doing was primarily targeting American oil companies. Now, in the 90s, and that was when I was working with Schlumberger in the US, this is the Clinton administration. Now, Clinton, you know, a lot of people have various memories of Clinton, most of them related to Monica Lewinsky. But actually, Clinton was the last of the genuine US presidents. And that's why they tried to nail him. Because he was winding down the US military. He actually got the US debt under some control. He actually had a positive balance of payments. And that's why they tried to nail him. That's why they tried to demonize him. They tried to impeach him, because he wasn't doing the bidding of the global corporatists. Let me tell you, if Hillary gets into power, she's going to be a totally different ballgame. Because she is absolutely on their payroll. Anyway, so Clinton was absolutely determined to try and ensure that the US oil industry cleaned up its act. And he made the oil industry responsible for cleaning up past spills. And he actually set up a super fund, so the companies that had acquired other companies and inherited spills could get money from the super fund to then go and repair. So a lot of money being put in to getting a lot of the damage that the oil and gas industry had created over sort of a century and put it right. Of course, that all stopped as soon as Bush and Cheney came into office. Anyway, this guy was buying up American companies through the Clinton administration, and American companies during the Clinton administration had massive amounts of their expenditure associated with things like routine maintenance, health and safety, environmental protection. And what this guy was doing was buying these companies and getting the BP accountants to go into these companies and stripping out the expenses that were associated with maintenance, health and safety, and environmental protection. So, of course, what he was doing was artificially making the companies look as though under BP management they were a lot more profitable than they were under American management. So, of course, the stock price of BP goes up and these guys all get enormous bonuses. But when you are cutting things like routine maintenance, health and safety, and environmental, guess what? Shit's going to start happening. Plants are going to start failing. Pipelines are going to start bursting. Under BP's ownership, the Trans-Alaskan pipeline has leaked more oil into the Arctic than it ever did under previous owners. And it's all related to cutting out routine maintenance. Well, because ostensibly BP is a British company, although most of the stock holding is with American institutions, but there were organisations like the health and safety organisations in this country basically saying, why isn't this guy going to prison? Because what was happening was people were getting injured, people were getting killed, there was massive environmental problems, and they're saying, how come this guy's not facing any legal charges? Do you know what BP's attitude was? It's actually cheaper to pay out individual compensation than it is to have these expenses in the budget for prevention. So it's better just to wing it and pay out the costs when they emerge. It's outrageous. It's completely outrageous. Well, there were calls for his resignation, but it was, Teflon. It was just water off his back. But he finally got his comeuppance when there was a massive explosion in a Texas refinery in Texas City on the Gulf Coast in December of 2005. And 15 workers were killed in that explosion. And it didn't take Sherlock to work out that the reason that the explosion had occurred is because routine maintenance hadn't been carried out for God knows how long, because the budgets had been cut. So, I'll just share a little bit of oil field history with you. The phrase nigger rig is a compliment in the oil industry. I mean, unfortunately, of course, the term has been abused somewhat. But the term is a compliment because the old farmhands who used to work the southern plantations were amazing oil field hands, because these guys could make anything work. Anything. The problem was The problem was they never went back and put it right properly. And that's where you get the term nigger rig. It's now called to become jerry rig. Because you will see that something had been patched up to keep it going. But of course, once it's been patched up, the likelihood of it breaking down again is pretty significant. So what was happening was these good old farm boys were keeping the refinery going, but no one was ever going back and actually doing the proper maintenance. So when the explosion occurred, 15 people died, Lord John Brown said, okay, all right, okay, maybe I have to think about resigning. I'm not going to do it right now. I'll resign in 2.5 years. And that'll give me time to groom my successor. Well, the successor that he was grooming was a guy called Tony Haywood. Some of you may remember his appalling handling of the PR in the post-Deepwater Horizon period. Anyway, he was actually forced out of office a little bit earlier. He was actually forced out of office in, I think it was May of 2007. And this time it wasn't related to what had been going on in BP. This was related to his personal life. The Mail on Sunday ran a series of articles, and in the articles they alluded to the fact that he was gay. Now there was no big deal there, and that had to be the worst kept secret in the oil industry anyway. So no issue there. But the reason that the Mail on Sunday was making a bit of a deal about it was because apparently he'd been going around telling people that his new partner, a guy by the name of Jeff Chevalier, had met him whilst they were both jogging in a South London park. Well, the Mail on Sunday was printing the allegation that he'd actually met this guy on a gay dating website known as Booted and Suited. Which, if you've seen Dean Rush's van, that's why he has Booted and Suited, Mr. Booted and Suited alongside the van there. Well, Brown immediately said, oh no, that's a lie. But the Mail on Sunday article went on to say that Chevalier was living in a luxury London apartment and he was travelling first class with John Brown every time John Brown went away on company business. And the suggestion was that Brown was paying for this apartment and for Chevalier's travel expenses out of his BP expense account. Well, Brown immediately tries to get an injunction against the Mail on Sunday to prevent them from publishing any more of this. But the judge demands that Brown turns up in person because the judge knows that the Mail on Sunday would not have printed this stuff unless it was 120% sure it was fact. For 8 days, Lord John Brown took the oath and swore that it was absolutely wrong to suggest that he'd met Chevalier on a gay dating website because he'd met him in a park. And it was totally fallacious to suggest that he'd been abusing his BP expense account. Well, the Mail's lawyers were obviously releasing a bit more information every day, and eventually, obviously, they released a silver bullet, and John Brown asked to approach the bench. So he approached the bench. Do you know what he said? Well, he told the judge, he leaned forward and he said, I might have made a mistake. I might have made a mistake. So here was a guy who for 8 days had taken the oath, challenging the Mail story, and now he says he might have made a mistake. The Mail immediately called for this guy to be charged with perjury, as of course any normal person would have been. But the judge said, oh no, there won't be any perjury charges here. The shame that he's brought on himself and BP is punishment enough. So guess what? Well, so he leaves the role of Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, and he goes away and works as a consultant for an oil company. Oh gosh, which one was it? Oh no, it's BP. And whilst he's working as a consultant for BP, building up relationships between BP and the Russian gas companies, he's earning more money than he was when he was Chief Executive Officer. I mean, how absurd is this? Meanwhile, when I go back a little while, he was very pally with Charles Linton. You all know who Charles Linton is? No? Oh, you have to search this. You have to, when you look at Charles Linton, when you search for Charles Linton, it will only take you about 5 minutes to understand why it is that Tony Blair will do whatever he's told. And it's still on the web, and of course the reason it's on the web is, and not pulled down, is because so few people know that Tony Blair's full name is Tony Anthony Charles Linton Blair.
What?
And when you search Charles Linton, you will find out very quickly what it is that the establishment has a hold on him. Anyway, he was very pally with this guy, and in 2001, Tony Blair, sorry, going back even further, in 1999, he knighted John, well no, he didn't knight John Brown because he thinks he should have done, but he actually has to get the Queen to do it. But he knighted this guy, and then in 2001, having obviously ripped out the old House of Lords and put in the People's Peers, so this guy became one of the first People's Peers of 2001, which is why he's Lord John Brown. So even all the court cases and everything else, he still retains his title of Lord John Brown. So he disappears from the sort of public scene after leaving BP and after the court case, but then he makes a return in 2010 when David Cameron appoints him to his cabinet. But wait for it. Wait for what his role is in the cabinet. This is the article that best captures that. From the Guardian. The former BP chief John Brown gets the Whitehall role. Controversial choice for super director post intended to inject business ethos into government. So this is the guy who, when he is chairman and chief executive officer of BP, proves that he has an extremely cavalier relationship with human life. And human life is just a commodity. But I mean, everyone should realise that. That's why it's called human resources. It's a commodity. So that you can be used, abused, and as soon as you no longer serve a purpose. So it proves that he's got a very casual life. But then, of course, in court, he demonstrates unequivocally that he has a very casual relationship with that little thing called truth and integrity. And yet he's appointed to the cabinet with a responsibility for business ethos. Well, bear in mind that this is the guy who steps forward last November, a year ago, just under a year ago, and says that he's going to do whatever it takes to get Britain at the heart of the shale gas revolution. But there's a link here that is almost unbelievable. Because the company, of course, that has drilled and fracked and caused the seismic events is a company called Quadrilla. Now, I know I've given you a bit of a clue here, but guess who the chairman of Quadrilla is? Lord John Brown. You couldn't make this up. I mean, this is corruption. There's no other way of looking at it. It's corruption. But of course, there's two types of corruption in this country. There's the corruption where all the right people are getting the appropriate backhanders. Backhanders, by the way, called stock options. Quite legitimate, isn't it? Stock options. And then there's the other type of corruption where the players aren't getting the stock options, and so you end up in court until you do give the stock options or whatever. And again, I don't have the time to go through it tonight, but what this guy has done is he has ensured that all of the key players in government now have an interest in getting the shale gas agenda rocking and rolling, because stock options are not regarded as cash, because the stock options at the point of being awarded have no value. In fact, I tell you, in this case, the stock options should be subject to the same legislation they are in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the moment you're awarded stock options, they have a value and you have to pay tax on them. And if you don't want to pay the tax, then you don't get the stock options. So you have to literally put your wallet where your mouth is, as it were. But in this country, of course, you could just grant the stock options, and they're worth nothing at the time of being granted. And then they're normally vested over a period of sort of 5 years or whatever, and then you can actually vest them any time, probably over 10 years. And of course, the only way in which they get a value is if the market value, the stock value of the company actually increases. So in other words, what they're doing is making sure that all of the key players have a vested interest in ensuring that this industry kicks off. BP, under Lord John Brown, developed a phrase which appears in their accounts It's called behavioural adjustment payments. Behavioural adjustment payments. It's exactly what it is. It's a payment to get people to do something that they actually know is not either legal or in their best interests, or in the best interests of anyone else. In the aftermath of the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, when BP really went after me in a big way, by the way, because I named the individual who was responsible for causing the explosion, and that was when BP went for but the good news is that in November last year, so November last year had its swings and roundabouts, the guy I named was charged with 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter, so it's a long way between being charged and being convicted, but it was a start. But in the aftermath of the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, in the BP accounts was 42 billion for behavioural adjustment payments. Ironically, that is exactly the same amount that they were fined. $42 billion. But that was to effectively buy people silence all around the Gulf Coast, because that, like Fukushima, that problem ain't going away anytime soon. But that's for another occasion. So what have we got going on here? You know, we have literally got a situation where we have a government that has people with phenomenal financial motivation to get this kicked off. And of course, it was Balkan that was always going to be the test case for this. But I mean, I just want to show you some of the articles that appeared in the media prior to Balkan, very quickly. This is Lord Lawson, Nigel Lawson, Maggie Thatcher's former Chancellor. And he was one of the guys on the committee in the House of Lords on Monday questioning, I mean, it was like, sorry, but it was mutual masturbation. I mean, yeah, this was Lord Lawson, Francis Egan of Quadrilla, and Andrew Austin of iGas Energy. And basically, they're saying, well, why aren't you drilling yet? Why aren't you drilling? And they're sitting there going, oh my God, it's regulation, it's environmental control. And there's Nigel Lawson saying, yeah, we're going to do whatever we can to remove all those obstacles. And this is what they're pumping out. And I've got to tell you, I read the Sun and the Mail every single day. I read the other papers probably twice a week, but I read the Sun and the Mail every single day. And the reason I do that is because by reading the Sun and the Mail, I know what a significant chunk of the adult population in this country believes to be the absolute gospel truth. So you know the start point at which you can sort of start talking to people. This was a great one. The Sun, Britain's backing fracking with the poll. This is pre-Balkan. Yes to fracking, 71%, no 29%. Now, 6 weeks later, the Sun was actually censured by the Press Council because somebody had had the foresight to ask them to publish the absolute numbers of the 71 and 29. And it transpires that these were published when about 8 people had responded to the poll. The finishing number, bear in mind this is pre-Balkan, but the end number was 54 and 46. They're much closer. But of course that appeared as an apology in sort of microscopic print on the bottom of page 83. You know, so nobody sees it. That's how they work. These are articles again for the Sun and the Mail. Williston, North Dakota, and here was Williston's been drilling for shale for 3 years. Population's almost doubled. The price of a one-bedroom flat has increased by more than 5-fold. Average house price has more than trebled. And that's because of all the influx of people coming into the area. Well, I know this area of the US. Let's put this in perspective. This is North Dakota. Okay. Williston is right here on the Ohio River. North Dakota is 40% bigger than England. 40% bigger than England. Just that oblong there. But the population of North Dakota is 60% of the population of Devon. It's a wilderness. I mean, I have driven. I think I've got to remember my geography, but I think Bismarck is about here. And I have driven across North, and you can drive for hours and not see life, let alone human life. It's a wilderness. So Williston, of course, is literally in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was a frontier town, and now it's just like the gold rush. So to compare what's going on at Williston with any town in the UK is just ridiculous. You know, it's like saying the UK is completely unpopulated, and the only community is like Leicester. And so people would flock from all over Europe to Leicester to participate in the mining activity. And here's the Mail's version of it. The new US gold rush that proves the anti-fracking fanatics have got it all wrong. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Anyway, of course, then comes Borkum, and things start to turn around. Because Borkum was unlike any other campaign, any other protest that, in my opinion, has ever occurred before. I mean, this is the UKIP view. This is Roger Helmer. He said, "I have absolutely no sympathy for the rent-a-mob protesters, the swampies and the Occupy movement, and the anti-capitalists and eco-freaks who have sought to hijack the Balkan protest."
Rubbish.
And he goes on to say, "And there is no truth behind scare stories promoted by green groups, Russian and Middle East oil and gas exporters about potential environmental impacts from fracking." I mean, this is just classic cognitive dissonance. And actually, one of the things that's really starting to embarrass UKIP is that people at the grassroots are really starting to understand the magnitude of the problem. And they're challenging now the leadership line. Well, the reality is that when Borkum kicked off, 24 hours after the first part of the drill arrived, people came in from all over the country. I didn't get there until the third day. And by the time I got there on the third day, there was already probably about 120 people there. And you know what? I was there for 29 out of the 66 days of the Balkan blockade. And one of the things that absolutely struck you is that the people at Borkum came from every single part of the social, political and philosophical spectrum. I doubt whether there were many subjects that everybody would have agreed on if they discussed them, but they all agreed on one thing, and that is that fracking ain't a particularly good idea. And that's what united the people of Borkum. This is what shocked the police. This is what shocked the Sussex police, because it was very quickly evident that the people had come to Borkum not to get arrested, not to be violent in any way, shape or form, but to peacefully protest and find ways to slow down the process so that Quadrilla couldn't frack. Because we all knew that Quadrilla were up against the time limit of September 28th, because that was when their planning permission ran out on the well site. So this was a war of attrition. And so right from the get-go, on the second day, when the second part of the drill arrived, it had a tragic failure of the brakes just outside the gate. I couldn't move for 5 hours. And then I think about a day later or 2 days later, there was a vintage fire engine that conked out. And incredibly, with people with their arms cemented into... which again caused a block for 5 hours. Now, clearly, I mean, what happened with the brakes was not premeditated, it was just opportunist. What happened with the fire engine was premeditated. But just an example of some of the things that occurred.
Yes, Rob.
This is Rob. I mean, what an amazing guy. I mean, probably one of the quietest guys at the camp there, you know. Lovely guy. And basically, as the tanker came out, he saw the ladder and just couldn't resist it. And he just happened to have a D-lock in his hand and just put the D-lock around his ankle and it blocked the road for 2-3 hours. Then we had, I think it was the following day, it was Nikki.
Yes.
And then Nikki's a teacher. And, you know, again, on her first ever protest campaign, and she managed to slip her hand around the fence, hold on to the gate, and then had a handcuff hidden up her sleeve, which she then put the handcuff around the gate, which meant that it blocked the gate for literally about 3-4 hours. And then one that was a little bit more premeditated the following day, Jamie. with the tripod, and then he climbed to the top of the tripod, and then super glued his hands to He says it's the most uncomfortable 5 hours that he's ever spent in his life. But he knew, the mission was to block the road. Now, in the course of the Gorkham campaign, 126 people were arrested. About half of that number was on one weekend, when another group came down with a bit of a different agenda, and actually our challenge was to make sure the police understood that there was one agenda with that group, and then there was a different agenda with the people at Gorkham at the campaign. So now, having said that, there's no question that that other group coming down was absolutely instrumental in the delay process, because with that group coming down, the police advised Quadrilla to shut down all operations for 6 days. So, ultimately, when you add all this stuff together, the bottom line was that Quadrilla could drill, but they just didn't have the time to be able to do a flow test, which in other words would meant they have to frack. So it was remarkably successful in many, many ways. Because of the police, the Sussex police were there most of the time, and we were able to talk to the Sussex police, and we learned that the police have 3 levels. The police who were milling around the camp with us were classified as level 3. Level 3 means they are capable of articulate conversation. Then you have level 2. The level 2 were the guys who were held in the vans, and you always knew when a truck was coming because they would come out of the vans and down the road and then block the road. And all the protesters would go in the other direction to slow the truck down. But these are level 2 guys, so these were, not quite capable. And then you had the level 1 guys, and actually we only apparently saw the level 1 guys once, but these are the guys who, they're very carefully selected, because if they can spell their name right on the application form, they're overqualified. Because these are the guys who aren't required to think. If they're told attack, that's what they will do. Now, fortunately, we only saw them once, and then they were pulled off fairly quickly. So we were absolutely working on the case that the senior officers down at the sort of campaign could see what the modus operandi was of the camp. And fortunately, in general, the Sussex police, in general, there were a few exceptions, but in general, their demeanour was actually quite acceptable. It was when the other police forces came in, like Met Police, Thames Valley, Kent, Hampshire, Wales, Devon and Cornwall even, because they came in with a sort of mentality as though they were coming up against Al-Qaeda. So it was a case of sort of lowering the testosterone, going, whoa, no, that ain't the way this is going to be. So, what the police also couldn't come to terms with is everyone they were arresting, when they were getting arrested, they were getting interviewed at Crawley Police Station, and then the plainclothes guys would come in, who were either CID or Special Branch or whatever the equivalent is today, and they would know, so who's your leader? Who's your leader? What leader? What leader? Yeah, this is the beauty of this campaign that is building right up across the country, because there are no leaders. And this is what is so unique about the way this campaign is unfolding, because it's not the usual suspects. And I gotta say, thank God some of the usual suspects are there, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have had a 24/7 presence at the gate, so that's fantastic. But what this is all about is people from, like I said, right across the social, political and philosophical spectrum, recognising that unless we all pull together on this one, our country is going to be destroyed. These are the people who've done their research. And, like me, it's the first time I've ever participated in anything, like this, and will do so again and again and again until such time as we get this shut down. We are up against, a hell of an objective here. The police are beginning, or certainly the Sussex police, were beginning to realise that they were not there as peace officers. They were there to ensure that the corporate agenda could be enforced. And what was very interesting was that, I think it was only after about 3 weeks, because we've been making an effort to educate the police officers, because they live in these areas too, Some of the Sussex police officers had specifically requested not to be assigned to Boreham. Now, unfortunately, because of the police mentality, that was probably a surefire way of ensuring that they were assigned to Boreham. But that's okay too, because that worked in our favour. Because they were then the ones who were sympathetic, you know, to what was going on there. So this is unfolding in a very, very interesting way. Now, the next area is going to be Barton Moss in Manchester. And when I was up in Barton Moss a few weeks ago, they were already starting to build the defences. The defences are getting even bigger now. I'm going to be up there at the weekend, taking another look at what's going on. By the way, yesterday I discovered one of the houses right adjacent to the site is on sale. It's a beautiful, beautiful converted farmhouse. It's on sale for £975,000. So I'm going to go and make the owners an offer at the weekend. I'm going to offer them £975. And I'm going to explain to them that if they take my offer, in 20 years, if this agenda kicks off, they will be extremely grateful. Because otherwise they're going to be left with this house, which they can never sell. The property market in Blackpool is totally dead. The property market in Boreham is moribund. In fact, even the BBC reported just a couple of weeks ago that Santander had actually withheld a mortgage offer on a property 8 miles away from Boreham. Now, I think somebody had a word in Santander's ear, because this, of course, would have been a political nightmare for them. Because this wasn't even in Boreham, it's 8 miles away. And I think somebody had a word in their ear, and I would pretty much hazard a guess that the government, the Treasury, has underwritten this particular mortgage. But how many times are they going to do that? Because, you know, one of the things, now I know, because I've done my research, now I know which properties in the immediate vicinity of the pad in Manchester are up for sale. I'm going to be visiting those estate agents on Saturday, and I'm going to be knocking on the doors of those houses and just asking them what the game plan is. Now, actually, I've got to say that the house, which is the other side of the M62, the one that's for sale for £975,000, if we can persuade them to rent it to us, it's got an enormous field there. It's a perfect campsite. So, hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Got to give it a try. And this, by the way, was from the Daily Mail earlier this year about Blackpool. Yeah, 100 buyers per home in Brixton, but a 3-bedroom house in Blackpool can't sell for 50,000. What's going on? The quadrilla effect. Yeah. I've got a very good friend. I mean, I have a personal interest in this because I have a very good friend. I've spoken in St Anne's about probably a dozen times over the last 7 years, and I've always stayed with this particular guy. He and his wife, they had this beautiful 5-bedroom house in the once desirable suburb of Portland-le-Fylde. After the second earthquake, they decided to accelerate their retirement plan. They'd already been talking about it for some time, but they decided this was the kick to make it happen. So they went across to Spain, found an apartment that they liked in Spain, and literally moved lock, stock and barrel to Spain. And left the house with an agent and a friend just to sort of keep an eye on it. The house was valued at £325,000. It is a beautiful 5-bedroom house, and it's very well maintained. But my friend said, well, you know what? I want to move the house very quickly, so I'm going to put it on the market at £250,000. And the estate agent said, oh, no, you can't do that, you'll upset the market. And he said, well, hopefully not for very long, because it should go very quickly, right? And they said, well, you know, how about we put it on the market at £299, and you know, because otherwise it's going to look as though there's something wrong with it because it's a bit too cheap. And he said, okay, I'll take your counsel, £299, but if somebody comes along with an offer of £250,000, I'll take it. They said, okay, understood. That was September of 2011, so that's a little over 2 years ago. So how many offers do you think he's had on this amazing property that's on the market at 10% below anything else in the area? No. Yeah, big fat zero. No. Big fat zero. Now, I went to visit with him just before the tour kicked off with a vengeance. And, we were talking about the tour and talking about everything that's going on in the UK. And this guy said, Ian, he said, every time I think about this, he said, I just want to cry. He says, because I've worked all my life, he's a Scot, he's a Glaswegian and moved down to Blackpool. He said, I've worked all my life believing that, what you've got to do is accumulate, you buy your property so that you can live in financial security in your retirement. He said, and so all my life I've believed owning a property was an asset. He said, but this damn thing is a liability. And let me tell you, if somebody offered him £100,000 right now, he'd bite their arm off. Because he hasn't got a mortgage on it. But it's a liability. He's living in Spain, just wants shot of it, basically. And this is what we're going to be seeing wherever this kicks off in this country. It's what we see everywhere in the world. Did anybody see my online show, Fracking Nightmare, on Monday? Because I interviewed a guy from southern Queensland, Brian Monk. If you haven't, I'm not going to spoil it, but if you haven't listened to it, I would encourage you to listen to it. Brian got very, very emotional. He has only been living above a fracked gas field for 5 years. And it's destroyed his life and his family's life. All of the evidence is out there. The establishment's working on the basis that if we don't look, then we'll just take what they say at face value, and they can dismiss the campaigners as emotional environmentalists or whatever. The moment anybody looks at it, they realise that this ain't the case. So that's our challenge now. Our challenge is literally to raise the awareness right across the country so that we destroy the political and the investor will to support this industry. We can make that happen, as we've seen in East Kent and in Wisborough Green, and in Brent, with these local authorities literally saying, we're just not going to approve any planning applications that are submitted. So we can achieve it. And we've got groups, all using different names, like Worthing Against Fracking, Farnham Against Fracking, Frack Free Dorset, and it's great that they use different names because that demonstrates that there's no national hierarchy. It's what I call network anarchy. Thank God we have social media, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible. And they can't shut down the social media because so much of the economy is inextricably interlinked with social media. So to shut down social media would mean that they shut down the economy, and they can't do that. So, we've got to maximise these tools. But they're also working against us. If you put Ian Crane fracking in there, then what you find ain't what you should be finding. So once you start to get the head above the parapet, they'll find ways to sort of just get you to the back pages. That's why I say to people, if you're looking for some of this stuff, you're looking for information, sometimes the best place to start looking is page 10 or 20, and see what they push back there, because they assume that people are only going to look at page 1 or 2. Okay, we're going to take a short break. So what I'm going to do, when we come back, the first thing I'm going to show you when we come back is a short animation, so you have a visual in your mind about the fracking process, and we can look at the fundamental issues of the water shortage, the water contamination, the toxification of the water, the soil and the air. And I will show you video footage, short clips from southern Queensland, which will prove to you, beyond any shadow of doubt, that this process does contaminate water, soil and the air, not like this idiot that's over from the US right now playing.
Yeah, that's what I said, it was so amazing. Walking on castle.
So let's take 15 minutes, get a cup of tea and catch back in. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I really want to now bring it all together for you, and sort of, you've heard a bit of the background. Now I really want to bring it all together for you, give you a visual image of what a fracking operation is, and then literally walk through the major issues. We don't have time to go through all of the issues, but we'll look at the major issues, because this is enough for it, in my opinion, to be an absolute no-brainer. And then I'm going to show some footage from Queensland of the contamination of the water, the soil, and of the air. All the footage I'm going to show you is available on YouTube. It's also incorporated into this is a brand new documentary by a young filmmaker, Marco Jackson. This guy came to one of the very first Fractured Future talks I gave in Glastonbury in February, and was so shocked. Went away, did a bit of research, and then decided he wanted to make a documentary. Got a little bit of financing from Lush for it, a little bit. But this is the finished product, and it's a truly outstanding documentary. Really looking at the potential impact in this country, and also showing the impact, the evidence of the impact in the US, Canada and Australia. So, the first video I'm going to show, it's an animation, it's just 5 minutes. It's made by one of the companies doing the drilling and fracking in Canada. So of course they're waxing lyrical about how safe, how clean. But listen carefully to some of the things they say in the commentary, because I'll show you, or you'll probably hear it yourself. If you miss it, then they've got away with it. But they are actually, it's the half-truths. It's the obfuscation. So they're not actually lying, but they're not exactly telling the whole story.
Natural gas from the Utica Shale is a clean and efficient energy source that is abundant in the St. Lawrence lowlands of Quebec. Let's take a look at the horizontal drilling and stimulation processes that have made shale gas exploration so successful. A drill bit is mounted on the end of the drill pipe. As the bit grinds away, a mixture of water and additives called mud is pumped into the hole to cool the bit and flush the cuttings to the surface. The mud cakes on the walls at the wellbore, keeping it intact and preventing invasion of drilling mud into the surrounding rock formation. The hole is drilled below the deepest freshwater zone or aquifer near the surface.
Did you catch that? The deepest freshwater aquifer near the surface. See, that's just one example. I'm not going to stop it again. That's the sort of thing you're listening for.
The drill pipe and bit are removed. Surface casing is then inserted into the drilled hole to isolate the freshwater aquifers. Once cemented, it serves as a foundation for the blowout preventer, a safety device that connects the rig to the well bore. Cement is pumped down the casing and out through the opening of the shoe at the bottom of the casing. It is then forced up between the casing and the hole, permanently sealing off the well bore from the fresh water. Once the blowout preventers are installed, the pipe and bit are lowered back down the hole to drill through the plug in cement and continue the vertical section of the well to approximately 300 meters above the planned horizontal leg. This depth is called the kickoff point, where the curve will begin so that the horizontal section can be drilled. Up to this point, the process is the same as drilling a vertical well. Again, the pipe and bit are pulled out of the hole, and a downhole drilling motor with measurement well drilling instruments is lowered back into the hole to begin the angle building process. The distance to make the curve from the kickoff point to where the well bore becomes horizontal is typically just under 300 meters. Once the curve is completed, drilling begins on the well's horizontal section called the lateral. The pipe used to drill the well measures 9 meters in length, and each length weighs approximately 224 kilograms. It takes over 350 pieces of pipe, weighing nearly 79 tons, to drill a 3,200 meter well. At various stages of drilling, the pipe is taken out of the hole for tool and bit changes and put back in. This process is called tripping pipe. When the targeted distance is reached, the drill pipe and bit are removed from the well bore one last time. Production casing is now inserted into the full length of the well bore. Cement is again pumped down the casing and out through the hole in the casing shoe, forcing the cement up between the casing and the wall of the hole, filling the open space known as the annulus. Casing the well is a very important process because it permanently secures the well bore, and it prevents hydrocarbons and other fluids from seeping out into the formation as they are brought to the surface. At this point, the drilling rig is no longer needed. A temporary wellhead is installed, and the location is prepared for the service crew, who will perf, frack, and prepare the well for production. The first of these steps is to perf or perforate the casing. A perforating gun is inserted into the casing to the targeted section of the horizontal leg. An electrical current is sent down the wire line to the perf gun and sets off a charge that shoots small holes through the casing and cement and out a short distance into the shale formation.
Now, if that was the end of the process, I wouldn't really have too much of an issue with it. Well, I would, but not so much that I would come and be talking about it, because that's Witch Farm. That's what's happened at Witch Farm, and there's been well over 2,000 wells, not necessarily horizontal, but well over 2,000 wells drilled in this country to exploit the hydrocarbons in conventional geology. And it's the same technique whether you're drilling for water or geothermal. Basically, once you drill into the target geology, once you perforate the casing and you open up the geology, then obviously the hydrocarbons or the water or whatever you're mining flows into the well and to the surface. Normal scenario. But this isn't normal, because in a conventional geology like Witch Farm, you could drill for 8 miles, like they have. In unconventional geology, it's maybe 5, 6, perhaps 700 metres, and that's it. There has been some talk about the issue of using depleted uranium in the perforation process. Halliburton have experimented with that a long time ago. To the best of my knowledge, they've only done it once, and that was in the US. And the whole idea was to accelerate the fracking process by obviously using depleted uranium. So it wasn't just a TNT charge, it was a depleted uranium charge that opens up the geology massively. But it's a bit of a red herring in this country. I mean, it's an important question to ask, but I don't believe for 1 minute that that process will be used here. But it's certainly a question that should be asked to ensure that we get a categoric answer that it won't be used. But it's the next stage of the process that is the problem, because this is the tight geology. So if you just perforate the well, basically nothing's going to happen. It's just going to be a damp squib.
The perf gun is then pulled out of the hole. Next, because shale is tight or compressed, the well will have to be fracked. Known as hydraulic fracturing, this is a process where water, sand, and additives are pumped into the wellbore and down the casing under extremely high pressure. Water and sand make up over 99% of this frac fluid. The remainder consists of compounds commonly found in consumer products. As the mixture is forced out through the perforations and into the surrounding rock, pressure causes the shale to fracture. This creates a pathway connecting the reservoir to the well and allows the gas to flow to the well bore. Next, a temporary plug is used to close off or isolate the perforated and fracked section of the well bore, so that the next stages of the horizontal leg can be perforated and fracked.
Okay, now just to put in perspective this frack process, that 8-stage frack in the animation took about 2.5 seconds. The longest ever frack job took place earlier this year, where they were pumping frack fluid downhole continuously for 111 days. So that puts into perspective the volumes that we're talking about. Now that's not going to be the case in this country, but it could still run into a day and a half, 2 days. But now, what we see here is literally the wet dream of a frack job. Because in the animation, what we see here is supposedly the petroleum engineers, the geologists and the chemists have calculated the mix so accurately that when they're pumping down, the fracks stop conveniently just before they get to the edge of the target geology. In reality, geology doesn't conform to anything. You cannot predict how geology will behave. It is an educated best guess. So yes, there's no question, the petroleum engineers and the geologists, they have their models from previous jobs, they have their seismic surveys, but it's still no more than an educated best guess. A lot of time it's gut feel and intuition. The evidence that they can't calculate it is based on the fluid loss. So this is, bear in mind, this is one well, one horizontal section. We're talking 8 of these going off of each vertical section. The amount of water, and I'm going to be conservative, the amount of water that it will take to drill and frack one well, at a conservative estimate, is 2 million gallons. Francis Egan and Andrew Austin have said up to 4 million gallons. That's their quote, not mine. I'm going to play conservative because I don't want to be accused of exaggeration. 2 million gallons per well. 8 wells per pad, that's 16 million gallons. 6 to 8 pads per square mile, that's 96 million gallons, conservative. Let me round it up to 100, just for easy calculation. 100 million gallons of fresh water per square mile. When we hear people saying, oh no, but we're using seawater. No, they're not. They have used seawater to frack offshore wells, but that's a totally different process. The only similarity is that the term frack's used, but the actual process is completely different. 100 million gallons. In the animation it said 0.5% is sand and additives made up of chemicals normally found in household products. Well, paint thinner is a household product, but you're not going to mix that with the water in your kettle, are you? I am quite happy to acknowledge that some frack jobs do take place with 0.5% of additives. I mean, that is how they get around this. It's not a lie. But it is more usually about 5%. So what we're really looking at is 100 million gallons of water, fresh water per square mile, with 5 million gallons of toxic additives. The frack fluid is designed to do a job. It's designed to be aggressive. It's designed to destroy the geology. It's designed to create artificial porosity and permeability to allow the gas to flow into the well. The problem is that the frack fluids are so aggressive that in many cases, I would say most, but the industry would acknowledge some, they overfrack. They overfrack, which is causing breaches between geological strata. And if the adjoining geology, if the adjoining rocks have a natural porosity or permeability, then of course once the gases are released from the tight geology where they've been held for millennia, they're now on a mission, obviously to find the path of least resistance. And I'm going to show you the evidence of that path of least resistance in a little while. Of that 100 million gallons plus 5 million gallons of toxic additive that's pumped down the hole, it is considered to be a successful job if they recover 50%. The other 50% is lost. 25 years ago, somebody came up with a bright idea that if you mixed a dye with the frack fluid, if there was a breach, creating migration of the frack fluid and the gases, then with the dye added, you'd be able to spot it straight away. So consequently, the oil industry has resisted adding dye to the frack fluid for the last 25 years, so they're not added, period. So we've got a number of issues here. We've got the volume of water. In the US, they're sucking the water out of the Great Lakes and out of the Great River System, the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio rivers. In the West, and particularly in West Texas, which is still in phenomenal drought, there are communities in West Texas that haven't had water coming out of their taps now for over 3 months. These communities have taken the gas industry to court to try and prevent them from sucking the aquifers dry so that they can maintain their livelihoods, because it's mainly agriculture. In the courts have all ruled in favour of the industry, because in the US, the corporation takes precedent over the citizen. It is a corporate state. We're not much different, by the way, but in the US it is the epitome of the corporate state, and Texas even more so. So these people in West Texas are literally, it's the Bible Belt, so they have prayer meetings every morning, noon and night, praying for rain, because the gas industry is destroying them. And some of you, if you heard the interview I did with Brian Monk, and I asked him why he stayed there, and he explained why he stayed there. It's the same with these people. In fact, in the Midwest, the people there have a much deeper existential attachment to their property, because in many cases their family have been on those properties since their ancestors came over on the wagon trains 200 years ago. And now the land can't support them. So the gas industry provides bottled water so they can at least subsist, but there's not enough water for them to maintain their livelihoods. So the cattle die, the crops die. In Australia, they're taking the water out of the Great Artesian Basin at a rate 6 times greater than it can naturally replenish. So in this country, where is the water coming from? This is the question that the government and the water authorities are just not answering. And we know that Sussex Water asked the Environment Agency the question over a year ago. And the Environment Agency was basically told to sit on their response until the appropriate government department had managed to work out a more acceptable response. Now what we've got is the water authorities champing at the bit, looking at a volume market, and they're looking at the discount rates that they'll be able to offer these companies as they buy water literally in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of gallons. If they frack the well at Borkum, the amount of water that they would need for that would be the equivalent of all the water consumed by the community of Borkum and the surrounding area for 3 whole days.
Then surely you're going to have to put people on water rations.
Well, probably worse. But yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, all of these issues are the ones that have to be addressed, and they're not being addressed. We've got other issues that come out of this as well. Because once you mix the frac fluid with the water, it's no longer water. And it will never again be water. The water is lost to the system.
Okay, this is our rig up to prove that the government's been lying to us about there being no gas in this water bore. This water bore has now been running for a few minutes, and as you can see, it's burning gas. This would be the gas that the government maintains isn't present, that the Queensland scientists at a couple of laboratories have said there's no gas in this water bore. So every Queenslander can feel quite confident in the fact that the government's tested these gas bores and said that there's no leakage. They can be so confident that they're probably corrupt or lying. Corrupt, lying and incompetent. It's got to be something. Yep.
We've got BG Group, QGC, on one side of our property and Origin Energy on the other side. Their coal seam gas tenements divide our property in two. We do not have any coal seam gas infrastructure on our property, or so we thought, but this flame is coming from the water from our registered stock and domestic water bore.
I think that is the most damning. It's not a huge amount of gas, but it is so damning because it's there all the time.
Both coal seam gas companies have been heavily extracting water from the aquifers under us, leaving us with very little water and more gas.
That was funny.
And to the Queensland Government, the Queensland Gas Inspectors and the Australian Water Testing Laboratories, do you really want to keep on lying? The Queensland Government, with its inadequate testing regime, now needs to retest every piece of coal seam gas infrastructure in Queensland again, with us boys, to make sure you're doing it right.